The autumn wind swept across the plains of South Dakota in early November 2006, carrying with it the scent of dry grass and distant rain. The Hartwell family, Greg, his wife Linda, and their two daughters, 14-year-old Emma and 9-year-old Claire, had lived in the small town of Timber Ridge for 8 years. Greg managed the local hardware store, while Linda taught piano lessons from their modest 2-story home on Maple Street. They were the kind of family everyone knew, the kind that showed up to every school function and church potluck. On November 3, 2006, they vanished. The last confirmed sighting was at 6:47 p.m. when Greg pumped gas at the Shell station on Highway 14. Security footage showed him filling up their silver Honda Pilot, Emma visible in the passenger seat scrolling through her iPod, Claire pressing her face against the back window, making silly faces at the camera. Linda stood by the pump, arms crossed against the chill, her red scarf bright against the grey evening sky. Nothing seemed amiss. Greg paid cash, waved at the attendant, and drove west. They never made it home. If you're finding this story as gripping as we are, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's continue. The alarm went off when Linda's sister, Patricia, arrived at their house the next morning for their standing Saturday coffee date. The front door was unlocked, which wasn't unusual for Timber Ridge, but the house felt wrong. Linda's purse sat on the kitchen counter, her phone plugged into the charger. Emma's backpack leaned against the stairs, homework half finished on the dining table. Claire's jacket, the purple one she wore everywhere, hung on its hook by the door. Patricia called the police at 9:23 a.m. Sheriff Tom Ridgway had been in law enforcement for 26 years, and he'd never seen anything like it. The Hartwells had simply evaporated. Their vehicle was gone, but everything else remained untouched. Bank accounts showed no unusual activity. Credit cards hadn't been used. Greg's wallet was missing, but Linda's remained in her purse with $43 and her driver's license inside. The initial investigation moved fast. Roadblocks went up within hours. The FBI joined by Monday, treating it as a potential abduction. Volunteers from 3 counties combed the surrounding farmland and forests. Helicopters swept the area. Divers searched the Missouri River and every creek within 50 miles. Nothing. As days turned to weeks, theories multiplied. Some believed Greg had debts they didn't know about, that he'd fled to avoid consequences. Others whispered about affairs, secret lives, witness protection gone wrong. The most persistent rumor involved a custody dispute from Greg's first marriage 15 years earlier, a daughter he'd lost contact with after his ex-wife moved to Oregon. Could she have orchestrated something? But Linda's family knew better. Patricia stood in front of news cameras, her voice breaking but firm. My sister would never leave without a word. Those girls were her entire world. Something happened to them. Someone took them. The case dominated local news for months. Emma and Claire's photographs appeared on telephone poles and grocery store bulletin boards across the Dakotas. Age progression images were commissioned, showing what the girls might look like at 16 and 11, then 18 and 13. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children added their case to the database. America's Most Wanted featured them in a segment that generated hundreds of tips, all leading nowhere. By 2008, the active search had wound down. The case remained open, but investigators had exhausted their leads. Sheriff Ridgway retired in 2011. The Hartwell disappearance, his only unsolved case, the one that haunted his dreams. He kept their photograph on his desk at home, 4 smiling faces frozen in time at Emma's 8th grade orientation. The house on Maple Street sat empty for 3 years before the bank foreclosed. Patricia couldn't bear to sort through her sister's belongings, couldn't face Claire's room with its stuffed animals still arranged on the bed, or Emma's posters of Fall Out Boy and the Fray still taped to the walls. Eventually, a family from Minnesota bought it at auction, repainted the rooms, covered over the memories with neutral beige and practical flooring. Timber Ridge moved on, the way small towns do. New families arrived, old ones departed. The hardware store changed hands twice. Children who'd attended vigils for the Hartwells graduated high school, went to college, started their own families. But some people never forgot. Patricia visited the police station every November 3rd, the anniversary of their disappearance, asking if there was any news, any development, anything at all. The answer was always the same: no. Then came October 2023. Marcus Webb was the environmental surveyor from Rapid City, contracted by the state to map erosion patterns along the Badlands River Basin. He'd been flying drones over remote areas for weeks, capturing thousands of images for geological analysis. Most of the footage was unremarkable: meandering waterways, abandoned farmsteads, the occasional coyote darting through scrub brush. On October 17th, while reviewing footage from a particularly isolated stretch of land 43 miles northwest of Timber Ridge, Marcus noticed something odd. The drone had captured a ravine, heavily overgrown with cottonwoods and wild plum thickets, the kind of place nobody had reason to visit. But there, partially visible through the canopy, was something metallic, glinting in the afternoon sun. Marcus enhanced the image, adjusted the contrast, zoomed in. His breath caught. It was a vehicle, wedged nose down in the ravine, so covered in vegetation and debris that it would have been invisible from the ground, nearly invisible even from the air, if the angle hadn't been perfect, if the sun hadn't hit just right. He called the sheriff's department that evening. The new sheriff, Amanda Ortiz, had grown up in Timber Ridge. She'd been 16 when the Hartwells disappeared, had been in Emma's biology class. She remembered the search parties, remembered her own mother crying at the vigils. She assembled a team the next morning. The ravine was accessible only by four-wheel drive, and even then, they had to hike the last quarter-mile through dense brush. Deputy Kevin Marsh went first, machete in hand, cutting a path. Sheriff Ortiz followed, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. When they reached the edge of the ravine, she saw it. A silver Honda Pilot, right where the drone footage indicated, tilted at a 40-degree angle. The front end crumpled against a massive boulder. 17 years of weather had rusted the body, shattered the windows, filled the interior with leaves and mud. Saplings had grown through the wheel wells, but the license plate was still readable: 4HRT829. Greg Hartwell's vehicle. Sheriff Ortiz called for the forensics team, the medical examiner, the FBI field office in Minneapolis. She called Patricia. Within 6 hours, the ravine was swarming with investigators, generator-powered lights illuminating the scene as darkness fell. The extraction took 2 days. The vehicle was too unstable to approach directly, the ravine too steep. They had to winch it up inch by inch, document every detail, preserve every possible piece of evidence. When they finally opened the doors, they found them, 4 skeletons, still buckled into their seats. Greg in the driver's position, Linda beside him, Emma and Claire in the back. The medical examiner would confirm it through dental records within a week. But Sheriff Ortiz knew immediately. She'd seen their photographs 1,000 times. The autopsy revealed no signs of foul play, no bullet wounds, no blunt force trauma inconsistent with the crash. The angle of impact, the damage pattern, the trajectory, everything suggested a single vehicle accident. Greg had left the highway, perhaps to avoid an animal, perhaps distracted for a fatal second, and plunged down an embankment so steep and so hidden that nobody had ever thought to search there. They died on impact, or shortly after, together. The investigation suggested they'd been traveling back toward Timber Ridge, not away from it. Perhaps they'd made a quick trip to the next town for something forgotten. Perhaps they'd decided to take the scenic route home, the back roads Greg preferred to avoid highway traffic. They'd simply been in the wrong place, at the wrong second, and gravity had done the rest. The funeral was held on a Saturday in November, 17 years and 3 weeks after they disappeared. The church overflowed. Patricia stood at the pulpit, tears streaming down her face, and talked about finally being able to say goodbye, about the relief of knowing, the agony of what they'd endured alone in that ravine. She talked about Emma's laugh, Claire's obsession with horses, Linda's terrible jokes, Greg's patience when teaching Claire to ride a bike. Marcus Webb attended, sitting in the back, uncertain if he belonged. Afterward, Patricia found him, took his hands in hers, and thanked him. Without his work, without that drone, without that perfect angle of sunlight on metal, her family would still be out there, unknown, unfound, lost forever in the wilderness. Sheriff Ortiz requested a review of other missing persons cases from the region, cross-referencing them with topographical data, looking for other ravines, other hidden places where vehicles might have gone off-road and disappeared. 2 months later, they found a pickup truck from 1998, the driver still inside, a man whose family had spent 25 years wondering. The Hartwells were buried together in Timber Ridge Cemetery under a large oak tree that turns brilliant gold every October. Their headstone is simple, listing all 4 names. The same date of death, finally confirmed, November 3rd, 2006. Beneath the dates, an inscription Patricia chose, "Together, always." The house on Maple Street still stands, painted yellow now, home to a young couple with twins. They know the history, knew it when they bought the place, but they don't find it sad. They find it meaningful, the way Patricia does when she visits the cemetery every Sunday, bringing fresh flowers, sitting on the bench nearby, talking to her sister about everything and nothing. Technology continues to evolve. Drones map territories that human feet may never touch. Satellites peer into crevices and shadows. Cold cases warm again as new tools reveal old secrets. The Hartwell case changed protocols across South Dakota and beyond. Systematic aerial surveys of remote areas, databases, cross-referencing topography with missing persons, new training for search and rescue teams. On the anniversary of the discovery, Sheriff Ortiz visits the ravine. It's peaceful now. The vehicle removed, nature reclaiming the scar. She thinks about the randomness of tragedy, how a family can vanish in a heartbeat, how answers can hide in plain sight for 17 years, waiting for the right moment, the right technology, the right person to look at the right angle. She thinks about Marcus Webb and his drones, about the countless hours of footage, about the miracle of that one frame. She thinks about Patricia's strength, about a community that never truly forgot, about the children in Emma and Claire's classes who are grown now, who brought their own children to the funeral. The case is closed, but the story continues. It lives in the procedural changes, in the families found after the Hartwells, in the lesson that some mysteries have simple, tragic answers. It lives in Patricia's memory, in the photograph she keeps on every wall, in the piano that still sits in her living room, Linda's piano, the one she couldn't bear to sell, the one her niece is learning to play on now. On quiet November evenings, when the wind sweeps across the South Dakota plains, carrying the scent of dry grass and distant rain, Patricia sometimes drives past the old house on Maple Street. She watches the lights in the windows, hears children's laughter drifting through the twilight, and feels something like peace. They're home now, her family. They're together. And after 17 years of not knowing, of imagining endless terrible possibilities, the truth, however sad, has set them all free. The story of the Hartwells is complete, the mystery solved, the long wait over. In the end, they were exactly where they'd always been, just beyond sight, just out of reach, waiting patiently in the South Dakota wilderness for someone to finally bring them home. The yellow house on Maple Street looks different in winter. Snow accumulates on the porch, where Linda used to hang wind chimes, where Greg would shovel a path every morning before the girls woke up. The current owners, David and Rachel Montgomery, moved in during the spring of 2015, drawn by the large backyard and the good school district. They knew about the Hartwells, everyone in Timber Ridge knew, but the real estate agent had been honest. The price was fair, and they needed space for their growing family. Rachel was pregnant with twins when they signed the papers. Patricia had met her at the closing, had shaken her hand and said something Rachel would never forget. "Fill it with life." That's what Linda would have wanted. So they did. The twins, Jacob and Lily, were born that July. Their laughter echoed through rooms that had been silent too long. Rachel painted the walls in cheerful colors, replaced the carpet, updated the kitchen. But she kept one thing exactly as it was, the growth chart penciled onto the doorframe between the kitchen and dining room, where Emma and Claire's heights had been marked year after year. The last entry dated October 2006, Claire at 49 inches, Emma at 63. David had suggested painting over it. Rachel refused. "It's part of the house's story," she said. "It's part of their story." When the news broke in October 2023 that the Hartwells had been found, Rachel called Patricia immediately. They'd developed an unexpected friendship over the years, meeting for coffee every few months, Patricia sharing stories about Linda's terrible singing voice, her obsession with true crime podcasts, the way she'd burn every batch of cookies but kept trying anyway. Patricia came to the house after the funeral, something she hadn't done since the foreclosure. She stood in the kitchen, her hand trembling as she touched the doorframe, traced her fingers over Claire's name. "She was so proud when she hit 4 feet, Patricia whispered. "Thought she was practically a giant." Rachel made tea, the same brand Linda used to buy, Patricia noticed, and they sat at the table where Linda had corrected piano students' finger placement, where Emma had stress-studied for algebra tests, where Greg had paid bills every Sunday evening. "Do you think they suffered?" Rachel asked quietly. Patricia had asked the medical examiner the same question. He'd been kind, but honest. The impact would have been catastrophic, he'd said. They wouldn't have known what was happening. It would have been instant or close enough that the difference didn't matter. "No," Patricia said, and she believed it. She had to believe it. "I think they were together, and I think it was quick, and I think," her voice broke, "I think they're at peace now." The discovery had reopened old wounds across Timber Ridge, but it had also provided closure. Barbara Chen, who'd organized the initial search parties in 2006, attended every day of the funeral visitation, greeting families who'd spent weeks 17 years ago combing through fields and forests. Many of them were grey now, some using canes, but they came because they'd never stopped caring. "We looked everywhere," Barbara said to Sheriff Ortiz during the reception. "We were so sure we'd find them, and they were there the whole time, just 43 miles away." The sheriff had spent considerable time thinking about that. 43 miles. It seemed like nothing now, in an era of drones and satellites and GPS tracking. But in 2006, with limited helicopter access and vast stretches of remote terrain, it might as well have been 4,000. The ravine where the Hartwells had ended up wasn't visible from any road. It wasn't near any hiking trail or campground. The land belonged to an elderly rancher who died in 2011, and his children had let it sit unused, eventually selling it to the state for conservation purposes. Nobody had any reason to go there. Nobody except Greg Hartwell, on a November evening in 2006, taking what he thought was a shortcut home. The forensics team had reconstructed the final moments with painstaking detail. Greg had turned off Highway 14 onto County Road 7, a poorly maintained gravel route that locals sometimes use to avoid traffic during harvest season. About 6 miles down, the road curved sharply around a rocky outcrop. Tire marks, long since washed away by 17 winters, but detectable through specialized analysis of the soil, showed Greg had braked hard, swerved right, and gone off the road at approximately 40 miles per hour. What he'd been avoiding, they couldn't determine. A deer, most likely. The area was thick with them, or perhaps a piece of fallen tree, a patch of ice, a moment's distraction. It didn't matter. The embankment dropped 30 feet at a severe angle, hidden by vegetation, and the pilot had tumbled end over end before wedging nose first into the ravine. From above, even from helicopter height, it would have been nearly impossible to spot. The silver paint blended with limestone outcroppings. The vehicle had landed in a depression beneath overhanging cottonwoods. By the time search helicopters flew over the area, and records showed they'd made several passes within a 2-mile radius, the vehicle was already covered in fallen leaves. Nature had kept the secret for 17 years. Marcus Webb continued his surveying work, but the Hartwell case changed him. He started volunteering with the National Association for Search and Rescue, offering his drone services for missing persons cases. He'd found 2 more vehicles since 2023. One containing a driver who'd gone missing in 2003, another empty, stolen and abandoned. Each discovery brought relief to families, answers to questions, closure to mysteries. He visited Timber Ridge in the spring of 2024, wanting to see the cemetery, to pay respects to the family his work had finally brought home. Patricia was there, as she was every Sunday, and they talked for over an hour. He showed her the footage, the exact moment he'd noticed the glint of metal, explained how he'd almost dismissed it as a natural formation. "But something made you look closer," Patricia said. Marcus nodded. "I'd like to think they wanted to be found, that they'd waited long enough." Patricia believed in things like that. Signs, feelings, the universe working in mysterious ways. Linda had been the same way, reading horoscopes at breakfast, knocking on wood, throwing salt over her shoulder. Greg used to tease her about it, but gently, the way you tease someone you love for harmless quirks. The case had prompted changes beyond South Dakota. The FBI updated their missing persons protocols to include systematic aerial surveys of areas surrounding last known locations. Several states allocated funding for drone programs specifically targeting cold cases. Technology companies developed AI algorithms that could scan thousands of hours of aerial footage, flagging anomalies that might be missed by human eyes. By late 2024, these efforts had led to the discovery of 17 previously missing vehicles, 14 containing remains, bringing closure to families who'd been waiting decades for answers. The Hartwell case had become a catalyst, proof that sometimes the answer wasn't that people had fled or been taken or started secret new lives. Sometimes the answer was simpler, more tragic, and had been there all along. Sheriff Ortiz presented the case at a law enforcement conference in Denver, using it as a teaching example. She talked about search patterns, about technology, about the importance of never giving up on cold cases. But mostly, she talked about Patricia, about a woman who'd shown up every single year for 17 years, asking the same questions, never losing faith that her family would come home. "That's what we owe the families," Ortiz told a room of 200 investigators. "We owe them that same faith. We owe them the promise that we won't forget, that we'll keep looking, that we'll use every tool available to bring their loved ones home." The presentation was recorded, distributed, became required viewing for search and rescue training across multiple states. The Hartwell case, once a source of frustration and grief, had become a source of hope and innovation. In Timber Ridge, life continued its steady rhythm. The hardware store, now owned by Derek Powell, hung a small plaque near the register. "In memory of Greg Hartwell, who made everyone feel welcome." Greg's old customers still talked about him, about his patience explaining the difference between various types of screws, about the way he'd always thrown in an extra handful of nails or an extra washer without charging. The elementary school established a scholarship in Emma and Claire's names, awarded annually to students showing kindness and creativity. Emma had loved writing, had wanted to be a journalist. Claire had lived for art class, covered every available surface with crayon drawings of horses. The scholarship funded summer camps for the arts, sending kids to programs their families couldn't otherwise afford. Patricia served on the selection committee, reading applications from children who reminded her achingly of her nieces. Some years it was easy to choose, other years it was impossible, and they'd stretched the budget to award multiple scholarships because Linda would have wanted that, would have found a way to help all of them. Rachel Montgomery's twins grew quickly, their heights marked on the same doorframe that held Emma and Claire's measurements. When Jacob reached Claire's final mark at age 4, Rachel took a photograph and sent it to Patricia. She wasn't sure if it would be welcome, wasn't sure if it was too painful, but Patricia had called immediately, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you," she'd said. "Thank you for letting them still be part of that house." The Montgomerys hosted Patricia for dinner regularly now. The twins called her Aunt Trish, climbed into her lap, demanding stories. She told them about 2 girls who used to live in their house, who'd loved hide-and-seek in the backyard, who'd built blanket forts in the living room, who'd been deeply loved. She didn't tell them how the story ended. That would come later, when they were older, when they could understand. For now, Emma and Claire were simply part of the house's history, friendly ghosts in the best sense. Memories kept alive through stories and love. On the 2nd anniversary of the discovery, in October 2025, the town held a memorial service at the cemetery. Not a funeral this time, but a celebration. Patricia had organized it with Sheriff Ortiz's help, wanting to honor not just her family, but everyone who'd searched, everyone who'd cared, everyone who'd never stopped looking. The elementary school choir sang "Somewhere Over the Rainbow," Linda's favorite song, the one she'd played at every recital. Barbara Chen spoke about the search efforts, about the community coming together, about how Timber Ridge had shown the best of small-town America in those dark weeks after the disappearance. Sheriff Ridgway, the retired sheriff, attended in his wheelchair, his wife pushing him along the path to the Hartwell plot. He'd lost most of his mobility to a stroke 2 years earlier, but his mind remained sharp. He sat for a long time looking at the headstone, tears running down his weathered face. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry we didn't find you sooner." Patricia knelt beside him, took his gnarled hand in hers. "You did everything you could. You never gave up. That's what matters." But Ridgway shook his head. 17 years they were out there. 17 years. "And now they're home," Patricia said firmly, "because of people like you who kept looking, who kept the case open, who made sure when technology caught up we were ready to use it. You brought them home, Tom. It just took time." Marcus Webb had flown in from Rapid City, bringing his wife and 2 young children. His son, barely 6, placed a small toy drone on the grave, carefully centered between the flowers. "Why are you doing that?" Jacob Montgomery asked, watching curiously. "Because drones helped find them," Marcus's son said seriously. "Daddy's drone, so they should have one too." The adults exchanged glances, emotions too complex to name. A child's logic, simple and pure, turning technology into tribute. As the sun set over Timber Ridge, casting long shadows across the cemetery, the gathered crowd sang together, old hymns, Linda's favorite songs, melodies Emma had loved, simple nursery rhymes Claire had outgrown, but Patricia remembered. Their voices rose into the October air, carrying over the fields and highways, over the farmland and forests, all the way to the ravine, 43 miles northwest, where a family had rested unknown for so long. The story of the Hartwells had found its ending. Not a happy ending. There was no happiness in 4 lives cut short, in 17 years of searching, in the what-ifs that would haunt Patricia forever. But it was an ending nonetheless, which was more than many families received. It was certainty instead of endless wondering. It was knowing instead of imagining. It was peace, however painful, instead of perpetual limbo. And perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was everything. As the memorial concluded and people began drifting toward their cars, Patricia remained at the grave. The toy drone caught the fading light, its plastic rotors gleaming. She thought about technology and fate, about metal glinting in the sun, about the perfect angle at the perfect moment, about how sometimes answers come when we've almost stopped expecting them. She thought about Linda's laugh, Greg's steady presence, Emma's ambition, Claire's endless energy. She thought about Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and ordinary Tuesday evenings that had seemed unremarkable at the time, but now felt precious beyond measure. "You're home," she said quietly. "You're finally home." The wind picked up, rustling through the oak leaves, carrying the scent of distant rain. Winter was coming, as it always did, but spring would follow eventually. The seasons would turn, the years would pass, and the Hartwells would rest here together always, watched over by a community that had never forgotten them, honored by the changes their discovery had prompted, loved by a sister who would visit every Sunday until her own story ended. Their disappearance had been a mystery. Their discovery had been a miracle. Their memory would be eternal. And in the yellow house on Maple Street, as darkness fell, Rachel Montgomery tucked her twins into bed and told them stories of two girls who'd once lived in these rooms, who'd been brave and kind and creative, who'd left behind marks on a doorframe and memories in hearts and a legacy that would outlive the years they'd been given. Life continued as it must. But the Hartwells remained woven into the fabric of Timber Ridge, in scholarships and protocols, in memorial services and changed regulations, in a toy drone placed on a grave and measurements preserved on a doorframe, and stories told by firelight on cold November evenings. They were found, they were home, they were, after everything, remembered. And that, Patricia knew as she finally turned from the grave, was the greatest gift she could give them. Not just the finding, though that had mattered immeasurably, but the remembering, the honoring, the ensuring that their story, tragic as it was, meant something, changed something, helped someone. 17 years they'd waited. Now they could rest. The case was closed. The story was complete. The family was whole again, together in the earth beneath the oak tree, while above them the world they'd left behind continued its journey through time, changed forever by their absence and their return.